The freeze frame moment is seared into memory. Kellyanne Conway leaning forward with that trademark smirk, shuffling her stack of papers as though they were sacred texts. Her eyes gleamed with anticipation, lips pursed in the self-assurance of someone convinced she was about to dismantle her opponent with facts. The room grew still. Reporters readied their pens, cameras zoomed in, and every flicker of Conway's expression seemed to stretch into eternity. She tapped the papers lightly on the table, savoring the tension. Then came the question, pointed, dripping with condescension, framed to paint Jasmine Crockett as unprepared and overmatched. No one in the room expected what came next, because Jasmine Crockett wasn't about to play by Conway's script. Conway's tone was the kind that audiences had grown used to. Patronizing, self-satisfied, the cadence of someone who believed victory was a foregone conclusion. She didn't just ask a question, she wielded it like a blade, slicing at Crockett's. Credibility. Every syllable seemed to carry the message, I'm the seasoned player here. You're just a rookie. But something was different this time. Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't bow her head or rush to defend herself. Instead, she leaned back slightly, eyes steady, lips pressed into the kind of calm smile that told a deeper story. The smile of someone who had been underestimated before and knew exactly how to turn the tables. The audience didn't notice it yet, but the balance of power had already shifted. Every second Conway reveled in her performance was a second closer to her undoing. The silence that followed her jab wasn't agreement, it was anticipation. Cameras captured Crockett's stillness. Journalists later described it as the pause before a storm. The smirk on Conway's face widened, as though she believed Crockett's hesitation meant victory. But to those who understood the rhythm of true debate, it was clear Crockett wasn't cornered. She was calculating, and then came the moment, the breath before eruption, the calm before fire. The chamber, the cameras, the country itself seemed to hold still, because in seconds the stage would flip, and Conway would be the one scrambling. Out for words. Kellyanne Conway didn't just stroll into the chamber that day as another political voice. She entered with a legacy. To her allies, she was the strategist who could twist a headline into a weapon. The architect of alternative facts. The master spin artist who never let truth stand in the way of a compelling narrative. For years, she had dominated green rooms, Sunday shows, and press scrums, turning every question into an opportunity to control the story. Her confidence wasn't born from the facts she clutched in her hand. It was born from years of outmaneuvering opponents who underestimated how far she would go to win. And then there was Jasmine Crockett, a freshman Democrat, a black woman from Texas who had clawed her way into Congress, not through privilege, but through persistence. Her reputation wasn't built on talking points rehearsed in a studio or power broker connections. It was earned in courtrooms where she defended the voiceless, in community halls where she faced the struggles of everyday Americans. Crockett carried no illusions about how Washington saw her. To the establishment, she was the underdog, the outsider, the rookie who should know her place. That was what made this clash so much bigger than two women sparring across a desk. It wasn't just a political debate. It was a collision between two visions of power. Conway represented spin, polish, and the old guard's certainty that narratives could be controlled from the top down. Crockett represented something raw, unfiltered, and threatening to that order. Live truth, unpolished but undeniable. Every camera trained on their exchange knew it. The audience at home, scrolling through their feeds, knew it. This was about more than Crockett's resume or Conway's so-called facts. It was about whether authenticity could still cut through the fog of spin. It was about whether truth, plain, human, unvarnished truth, could still shake the foundations of power. Conway sensed it too, though she'd never admit it. That was why she pressed harder, her tone sharpening, her smirk growing wider. She rattled off statistics, cherry-picked reports, and half-framed arguments designed to box Crockett in. She leaned on her reputation as though it were a shield, confident that the sheer weight of her performance would crush Crockett before she had a chance to speak. But Crockett's silence wasn't weakness. It was a fuse waiting to catch fire. The chamber felt it. That subtle shift when an underdog refuses to fold, when the air grows heavy with the possibility that the script might not play out as expected. Because in this room, for once, The spin artist wasn't the one writing the story. She was walking straight into a narrative that wasn't hers to control. And as Conway pressed harder, stacking her facts like bricks in a wall, Jasmine Crockett's calm began to change. Her eyes sharpened, her posture shifted, and the smile that once looked measured began to burn at the edges. Her silence was no longer the pause of calculation. It was the silence of someone ready to strike. And that was the moment Washington should have realized. Conway's script was about to be torn apart, line by line. Kellyanne Conway did not build her reputation in whispers or shadows. She carved it in bright studio lights, across cable news stages, and at the podium of the White House itself. To many, she was the embodiment of political theater, sharp, unflinching, and endlessly resourceful in her ability to redirect, reframe, and recast even the harshest scrutiny into a victory. She was the face of a political era that thrived, not on truth, but on the ability to manipulate it until it bent in service of power. Her rise was swift and deliberate. Long before she was a household name, Conway was navigating the inner circles of Republican politics. Her voice honed for sound bites, her instincts sharpened for combat. When Donald Trump's campaign needed someone who could soften the edges of scandal and sell chaos as stability, Conway was the perfect fit. She became the first woman to successfully manage a presidential campaign, a fact she repeated often, both as badge of honor and shield against criticism. But her true legacy emerged not from policy achievements or lasting reforms, but from 3 words that defined a political generation: alternative facts. With that phrase, Conway crystallized her role in American history. Facts were no longer immovable pillars of truth. Under her hand, they became clay, molded and reshaped until they served a purpose. What mattered wasn't what was true. It was what could be sold as true. Her aura was always one of elitism dressed as accessibility. She spoke with a confident air that suggested she had the inside scoop, the hidden knowledge, the polished perspective others lacked. She carried herself as if she were untouchable, cloaked in the authority of someone who had stood in the most powerful rooms in the world. To critics, she was the high priestess of spin, someone who wielded privilege and access like weapons. To supporters, she was the rare woman who could go toe-to-toe with any journalist and walk away unscathed. Yet the contradictions were impossible to ignore. She preached the sanctity of facts, yet she manipulated them freely. She claimed to champion the people, yet her career had been built in the rarefied air of political dynasties and media control. She chastised others for being emotional or unserious, even as her own performances thrived on drama and misdirection. Conway didn't just play the game, she relished showing the world that she could rig the rules and still declare herself the victor. Her dominance was rooted in the rhythms of television. She knew how to smirk at the right time, when to lean in, when to dismiss a question with a quip, and when to pivot so sharply that the audience forgot what was being asked. In the first place, she wasn't just answering, she was performing. And like any performer, she fed on the spotlight. The more the cameras rolled, the more unshakable her confidence grew. That was the Kellyanne Conway who walked into the chamber that day. Not just a political strategist, not just a commentator, but a woman cloaked in decades of media mastery, certain that no rookie congresswoman could rattle her composure. To her, Jasmine Crockett was an easy target, another ambitious politician who thought passion could outlast polish. Conway leaned on her papers as though they were gospel, her smirk telegraphing a simple truth. I've done this 1,000 times. You will not beat me at my own game. But that confidence was a double-edged sword. For all her skill, Conway had grown accustomed to environments she could control. Sympathetic hosts, carefully managed segments, adversaries more concerned with appearances than impact. She had not prepared for someone like Crockett, someone who had built her reputation not in the comfort of television studios, but in the trenches of real struggle. Because unlike Conway, Crockett had no script to cling to, no reliance on manufactured spin. Her arsenal was raw, lived truth, the kind of truth that didn't bend under the glare of lights or the pressure of spectacle. And so, as Conway's smirk widened and her voice grew sharper, she didn't realize that her armor, that careful construction of confidence and control, was already beginning to crack. Kellyanne Conway entered the chamber with decades of media mastery behind her. But in one moment, that armor would shatter, and the spin artist who had once controlled the nation's headlines would find herself outmatched by a voice she could neither dismiss nor discredit. Jasmine Crockett's story didn't begin with headlines, cameras, or marble chambers. It began in crowded courtrooms, cramped offices, and neighborhoods where the stakes were not about political power, but about survival. Long before she carried. The title of Representative Crockett was a lawyer who built her career on defending those society had pushed to the margins, the voiceless, the forgotten, the people who couldn't afford a voice in America's justice system. Her journey into law was not one of privilege. While others padded resumes with internships secured through family connections, Crockett was grinding her way through school with grit and determination, working jobs to pay bills while studying the fine print of constitutional law. She didn't step into the field to climb a ladder of prestige. She entered because she saw firsthand what injustice looked like when no one was watching, and she refused to turn away. In court, Crockett became a shield for the vulnerable. She defended young men pulled into a system that wanted to label them criminals before hearing their stories. She stood beside women whose voices had been silenced by poverty or abuse. She gave time, energy, and spirit to people who had nothing to give back but gratitude. That work was exhausting. It didn't pay in accolades or connections. It demanded sacrifice, long nights, endless paperwork, cases lost to a system stacked against her clients. Yet she persisted. Because to Crockett, justice wasn't a slogan. It was oxygen. That authenticity, the refusal to polish her edges, to please elites, made her an outlier in the polished world of politics. Where others rehearsed talking points, Crockett spoke with raw conviction. Where others bowed to hierarchy, she challenged it head on. And when she began her political journey, stepping into the arena of elected office, she carried that same people-powered fire with her. Her rise wasn't smooth. She faced constant dismissal from establishment voices who sneered at her youth, her style, her refusal to know her place. She was told she wasn't polished enough, not diplomatic enough, not deferential enough to the old guard. But every time the door seemed closed, Crockett knocked harder. Every time someone tried to silence her, she grew louder. She came from the grassroots, built by the support of people who saw themselves in her story. Teachers, single mothers, immigrants, workers pulling double shifts. They rallied not because she was perfect, but because she was real. She wore her battles openly, the long fights in court, the frustration with a system rigged against ordinary people, the determination to keep going when it would have been easier to quit. That authenticity didn't just resonate, it electrified. When Crockett stepped into Congress, she carried all of that with her. The courtroom grit, the scars of dismissal, the unwavering commitment to speak for those who had been pushed out of America's political conversation. And that made her dangerous to the establishment. Because unlike the elites who measure power in donors and connections, Crockett measured it in lives touched, voices heard, and communities lifted. Her presence was more than symbolic. It was disruptive. She represented a shift in who gets to speak in the halls of power. For decades, political narratives have been shaped by those with money, dynasties, and access. Crockett represented something else entirely, the people who had been locked out for too long. And so, when she sat across from Kellyanne Conway, papers stacked, smirk cocked, Crockett was not intimidated. She had faced tougher rooms, more hostile interrogations, and more stacked decks. She had argued against prosecutors who dismissed her clients as nobodies. She had challenged systems that seemed immovable. She had carried the weight of defending those with nothing but truth on their side. Compared to that, Conway's smirk was just another test. Every ounce of her journey, the sacrifices, the courtroom battles, the uphill climbs, the constant dismissal, had prepared her for moments exactly like this. This wasn't just another exchange of talking points. This was the collision of two worlds, one polished by privilege and spin, the other forged by struggle and authenticity. Jasmine Crockett didn't arrive in Washington by accident. She fought for every inch of ground she stood on. And that fight, that relentless refusal to bow, was about to ignite on the biggest stage yet. Because Conway didn't just see a freshman congresswoman. She saw someone she thought she could outtalk, outspin, outsmirk. What she didn't see was the history behind Crockett, the battles, the scars, the unshakable belief that truth spoken boldly could shatter even the strongest facade. And that History of Struggle was about to collide with Conway's smirk. Kellyanne Conway's voice rang sharp through the chamber, each syllable clipped with the certainty of someone who had spent decades mastering the cadence of televised combat. She flicked through her stack of papers like a dealer laying down cards in a rigged game. Poll numbers, cherry-picked studies, headlines plucked from sympathetic outlets, all laid out as if they formed an unassailable wall of truth. Her smirk widened with each so-called fact, her eyes darting toward the audience with that unspoken challenge. Go ahead. Try to dispute me. She leaned forward, her words laced with smug authority. Congresswoman, these numbers don't lie. Experience matters, facts matter, and frankly, rhetoric doesn't change reality. It was classic. Conway, a performance of certainty, the appearance of dominance. She wasn't just making an argument. She was trying to stage manage the moment, to remind everyone in the room of her reputation as the untouchable spin artist. But across from her, Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still, her eyes steady and unflinching, locked on Conway with a kind of calm intensity that revealed more than words ever could. She didn't shuffle papers. She didn't glance nervously toward her aides. She simply listened, every muscle in her face quiet but alive, as if weighing each syllable Conway threw like a dart. The room began to shift with the tension. A low murmur rippled through the crowd as Conway stacked fact upon fact, her tone more triumphant with each claim. Journalists leaned in, pens poised, waiting to scribble what they assumed would be the night's headline. Conway corners Crockett. But beneath the polished confidence of Conway's delivery, there was something hollow. She spoke of numbers without context, of studies stripped of nuance, of victories that existed more on cable news than in the lives of ordinary Americans. To the practiced ear, it was a familiar pattern, the sound of spin dressed as substance, and Crockett, with her courtroom-honed patience, recognized it immediately. She let Conway talk, let her bury herself in the avalanche of selective statistics. She knew the power of silence, the way it unsettled an opponent who thrives on rapid-fire exchanges. Conway wanted a sparring match. Crockett gave her stillness. Every second of that silence made the audience more uneasy. Eyes flicked from Conway's smirk to Crockett's steady gaze, sensing that something was building just beneath the surface. The energy in the chamber thickened, like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air is heavy with electricity and no one dares move. And for the first time, it wasn't Conway who held the room. It was Crockett. She leaned back slightly, her hands folded in front of her, her eyes never leaving Conway's. That silence wasn't weakness. It was power. The kind that comes from someone who doesn't need to rush, who knows her truth doesn't require theatrics to land. Conway rattled off one final statistic, her smirk now verging on triumph. She paused, expecting Crockett to stammer or scramble. Instead, the silence deepened. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Reporters gripped their pens tighter. Even the air felt suspended in anticipation, because everyone in the room could feel it now. Jasmine Crockett wasn't cornered. She was waiting, and when she finally moved, it was with the precision of someone about to strike. Her hand brushed the microphone ever so slightly. She leaned in slowly, deliberately, her posture radiating composure. The murmurs fell away. Journalists froze mid-scribble, and even Conway's smirk faltered for the briefest second. Then Crockett leaned into the mic, and the entire room froze. The silence that followed Kellyanne Conway's barrage was almost theatrical. Papers rustled faintly, cameras adjusted their focus, and the murmur of the crowd faded into stillness. Everyone expected Jasmine Crockett to falter, to fumble, to drown beneath the avalanche of statistics and smug certainty Conway had unleashed. But Crockett did not falter. She leaned in, her voice low, steady, and unshakable. Kellyanne, she began, each syllable measured like the opening statement of a seasoned attorney. I've spent my career standing beside people who couldn't afford lobbyists, who didn't have access to glossy reports or staged talking points. What you call facts, these numbers, these cherry-picked figures, mean very little to the mother in my district who works 2 jobs and still can't afford childcare. They mean nothing to the young man wrongly arrested because of the color of his skin. And they certainly don't erase the reality that too many Americans live every single day. The words landed with quiet force. The room didn't erupt, it tightened. The audience leaned in, drawn by the gravity of her tone. Conway smirked, tried to interject, but Crockett raised a hand gently as if swatting away a gnat. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. You see, Crockett continued, her gaze steady, there's a difference between facts and truth. Facts without context are like puzzle pieces scattered on the floor. You can arrange them however you want and call it a picture, but that doesn't make it real. Truth is what those puzzle pieces actually build when you stop trying to manipulate them. And right now, you're not building truth. You're performing spin. The crowd stirred and journalist pens flew furiously across notepads. It was no longer Conway who commanded the moment. It was Crockett. She leaned closer to the microphone, her tone sharpening with precision. You cite employment numbers. I've sat across from workers who were fired for speaking up about unsafe conditions. You wave poll results. I've walked streets where people are too disillusioned to even answer a poll. You flash crime statistics. I've defended innocent men who became statistics only because someone wanted to fill a quota. Gas rippled through the room. The contrast was stark. Conway's carefully curated facts suddenly looked brittle beside Crockett's layer of truth. And then, with a steady breath, Crockett delivered the line that would define the exchange. Facts without truth are just lies dressed in a suit. The chamber erupted. Some gasped audibly, others muttered wow under their breath. The sting of the sentence hung in the air, slicing through Conway's polished facade like glass shattering against stone. Conway shifted in her seat, her jaw tightening. She opened her mouth, but no words came. For the first time, her armor of confidence looked dented. Crockett pressed forward, her rhythm building like a crescendo. For years you've mastered the art of spinning. You've sold alternative facts as if reality itself were negotiable. But outside these halls, people can't spin away eviction notices. They can't spin away a doctor's bill. They can't spin away discrimination when it's staring them in the face. That's the America I fight for. That's the truth I live. The energy in the room was electric. Journalists weren't just scribbling. They were typing frantically, already, knowing this clip would dominate social media within minutes. Some lawmakers shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded with quiet admiration. Crockett paused, letting the silence deepen again before striking one last blow. Kellyanne, you spent your career defending power with performance. I've spent mine defending people with purpose. And in this room, on this day, purpose will always outlast performance. The impact was undeniable. Conway sat back, her smirk erased, her fingers tightening around the stack of papers that now felt useless. The so-called facts she had brandished moments ago seemed flimsy, even laughable, in the wake of Crockett's moral clarity. Then it happened, the collective reaction. A low rumble of applause rose from the edges of the chamber, subtle, at first, then swelling as if restraint could no longer hold. Cameras flashed, phones buzzed as aides and spectators clipped the moment, posting it online before the echo of Crockett's words had even faded. On social media, hashtags began to form within minutes. Crockett Clapback, facts vs truth, me speechless Conway. Twitter feeds lit up with gifs of Crockett's calm stare. TikTok edits looped her line about lies dressed in a suit, and Instagram reels captioned it as the mic drop of the year. The atmosphere in the chamber mirrored the frenzy online. Gasps had turned into whispers, whispers into buzz, and buzz into undeniable momentum. It wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a shift. For the first time that day, Kellyanne Conway looked like the one on the defensive, and Jasmine Crockett stood firmly in control of the stage. Crockett leaned back, her expression serene, as though she hadn't just detonated one of the most devastating takedowns in recent political memory. Her calmness only amplified the power of what she had done. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't bask in the moment. She simply allowed the truth to speak for itself. Conway tried to regain footing, flipping through her papers again as though one more statistic could erase what had just happened. But the effort looked desperate, even hollow. Every attempt to speak was drowned out by the echo of Crockett's words still lingering in the air. Facts without truth are just lies dressed in a suit. And in that instant, everyone understood. The performance had flipped. The cameras no longer centered on Conway's smirk. They zoomed in on Crockett's steady, fearless gaze. The power dynamic had inverted itself completely. The spin doctor had lost control of her own stage, and the underdog fighter had turned the chamber into her courtroom, with Conway now reduced to the defendant. The silence that followed wasn't weakness, it was dominance. Crockett had spoken. Her truth, and nothing Conway could say would undo it, and with one rebuttal, Crockett flipped the stage. The moment Jasmine Crockett's words hit the air, they didn't just stay trapped within the four walls of that chamber. They exploded outward, carried on the wings of cameras, cell phones, and social media feeds that churned with a hunger for moments exactly like this. Within minutes, the internet was ablaze. The first hashtag appeared almost instantly. Crockett Clapback. Then came Conway Exposed and Facts vs Truth. On Twitter, the clip of Crockett's mic drop line. Facts without truth are just lies dressed in a suit, spread like wildfire. People replayed it on loop, the way one replays a perfectly timed punchline or a knockout shot. On TikTok, creators wasted no time. One user overlaid Crockett's words on a beat drop, the moment her line hit, timed perfectly, the bass thundering beneath. Another spliced side-by-side clips of Conway confidently flashing her papers before cutting to Crockett's calm stare, captioned, "When spin meets reality." Memes flooded Instagram and Reddit. Conway photoshopped as a mannequin in a suit, Crockett holding a mic on fire. Late-night talk shows joined in. Hosts opened their monologues by replaying the exchange, exaggerating Conway's fumble, pausing just before Crockett's line, and letting the audience shout it in unison. The chamber had been stunned into silence. The nation was now laughing, cheering, clapping. But this wasn't just comedy fodder, it was validation. Commentators across the spectrum were forced to react. Progressive voices hailed Crockett as the future of unapologetic truth-telling in politics. One pundit declared she didn't just win that exchange, she changed the rules of engagement. Even some centrist commentators admitted that Conway, long untouchable in the art of spin, had finally met her match. Conservative defenders scrambled, some trying to downplay the moment, others shifting the narrative entirely, but their efforts felt scattered thin. The clip had already written its own truth, and while the pundits debated, ordinary Americans were sharing it with a different kind of energy. A teacher tweeted, "Finally, someone said what we've all been waiting to hear." A nurse posted, "She spoke for every one of us who's been drowned out by statistics that never tell the whole story." A young activist stitched the clip with their own story of being dismissed by politicians, adding, "This is why representation matters." For those who had grown accustomed to being overlooked, Crockett's calm defiance wasn't just satisfying, it was personal. She embodied what it meant to stare down power, to hold ground in the face of arrogance, and to win not with louder noise, but with undeniable truth. Meanwhile, Conway's credibility took a visible hit. Headlines that once painted her as the queen of spin now framed her as cornered, exposed, or simply speechless. Analysts noted the shift. This wasn't a stumble on live TV. It was a moment where the old guard of polished spin collided with the raw force of lived experience and cracked. The ripple effect stretched further. Cable news panels dissected the moment frame by frame, highlighting Conway's shifting expression, Crockett's unwavering calm, and the audible gasp in the chamber. Podcasts dedicated entire episodes to analyzing what the clash revealed about America's hunger for authenticity. Political blogs declared it a generational shift in power. The response wasn't limited to words. Campaign donations for Crockett surged. Grassroots organizers used the moment as a rallying cry, telling supporters, "If she can take on Conway, imagine what we can do together." Hashtags turned into slogans, slogans into merchandise. Within days, t-shirts emblazoned with facts without truth are just lies, dressed in a suit, began circulating online. Crockett herself stayed quiet in the immediate aftermath, letting the moment speak for itself. That silence only magnified the impact. She didn't rush to capitalize. She didn't scramble for more airtime. She simply stood firm in the truth she had delivered, and the country filled in the rest. The buzz became more than fleeting entertainment. It became a referendum on a style of politics that had dominated for years. The smirk, the spin, the smug certainty that performance could outweigh substance. And in Crockett's steady voice, people found the antidote. The chamber had witnessed it. The nation had amplified it. But beyond the applause, one question lingered, heavy with meaning. What deeper truth did this clash reveal? When the noise of hashtags, memes, and headlines began to fade into the steady rhythm of the news cycle, what remained was the deeper resonance of the moment. Jasmine Crockett had not simply parried a line of attack. She had reframed the entire battlefield. For years, Kellyanne Conway had embodied a certain kind of politics. The politics of spin, where performance often mattered more than principle, and the loudest voice often drowned out the truest one. But in that hearing room, Crockett turned the rules upside down. She reminded everyone watching that dignity will always rise higher than manipulation, and that truth will always pierce through the fog of spin. This wasn't just about Conway or Crockett, the narrator's voice seemed to echo. It was about who gets to define reality in America. Because beneath the clash of personalities lay a larger struggle, the question of whether facts could be twisted until they lost all meaning, or whether truth rooted in lived experience could reclaim its rightful place. Crockett didn't simply argue against Conway's papers and numbers. She spoke for every person who had ever seen statistics used to erase their story. Every worker whose lived reality was dismissed by a talking head. Every immigrant whose journey was reduced to a soundbite. Her composure became more than strategy. It became a mirror for the nurse who shows up despite exhaustion, for the teacher who speaks up when administrators look away, for the student who refuses to shrink, even when told their dreams are too ambitious. Crockett's fire reflected their own. She stood not as a politician performing for the cameras, but as a voice reminding the country that experience is not a weakness to be mocked. It is the very foundation of strength. And that's why the moment mattered. Because while Conway wielded spin like a shield, Crockett wielded authenticity like a torch. And when a torch is lit, the shadows retreat. In the end, the lesson was simple but profound. Your story carries power. Power that cannot be erased by smug interruptions or stacks of paper waved like weapons. Power that does not bend to manipulation, no matter how rehearsed or polished. Crockett's words distilled the truth into a single guiding principle. Facts without truth are empty, but truth spoken with courage can shake the foundations of power. For those who watched and felt seen, the message was unmistakable. This is not just politics. It is a reminder that when you stand in your truth, you redefine the terms of the fight. So as the cameras clicked off and the chamber slowly emptied, one reflection lingered above all others. A closing chord in the symphony of the clash. Your story is your truth, and truth always outshines spin. Kellyanne Conway walked into that chamber convinced she could corner Jasmine Crockett with a stack of papers and a smirk. But within minutes, it wasn't Conway setting the stage. It was Crockett. She flipped the moment, dismantled the spin, and left a master of manipulation scrambling for footing. This clash wasn't just a viral clip or a fleeting headline. It was a reminder of something much bigger. Resilience, authenticity, and truth always outlast arrogance and spin. Crockett didn't raise her voice or hide behind theatrics. She let her story, her experience, and her courage do the talking. And in doing so, she reminded America that strength isn't measured by the volume of your spin. It's measured by the integrity of your truth. If you believe in voices like Jasmine Crockett's, voices that fight for dignity, stand firm against condescension, and speak for the people who are too often silenced, then share this story. The world needs to hear it, not just as entertainment, but as proof that truth still matters and courage still counts. Because at the end of the day, this moment wasn't about Conway losing her footing. It was about every person who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told they don't belong. Crockett stood tall not only for herself, but for them and for you. This is more than politics. It's about who we are and who we choose to be. And when faced with arrogance, spin, or dismissal, may we all remember your story is your power. And power, when rooted in truth, cannot be silenced.